Hey, Lance, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Fantastic. Well, listen, man, we got a lot to chat about. Obviously, we had a podcast scheduled for the other day, and you had quite a neat experience that we needed to go ahead and postpone this for a couple days. And I definitely want to dive into that one there too, but I'll leave that as a little teaser. What I want to know is a little bit of background for you. If you can kind of tell our listeners, where you grew up and then how you got involved with being one of the premier photographers for wildlife in this entire country, man. I'd love to just kind of have you, chat about that and we'll kind of thread the needle from there.
All right. Well, I was actually born in the Central Texas area in San Antonio. Was the largest baby ever born in the San Antonio Methodist Hospital at 11 pounds 10 ounces. But I don't know that you really wanted to know all that.
That's a
but
fun fact. Yeah.
it's interesting. I think I was the largest baby born there into the 80s sometime. So anyway, but I grew up in the Central Texas area, Seguin Gonzalez area. And then my dad moved to South Texas for a job. And he ended up, when I was 16, managing a ranch down here in South Texas, the Lacoma Redgate Ranch owned by the Benson family. And so I had always wanted to take pictures of wildlife like I'd seen in the hunting magazines. Because growing up, my dad was a gunsmith in the Seguin Gonzalez area, had a gun shop, Earl's Gun Shop, for many years, for like 25 years. And so I had always gotten the hunting magazines. We fished and hunted every weekend. And so growing up, seeing the photos in the hunting magazines, I always thought, man, I would love to shoot photos like what I see in the hunting magazine of deer and turkeys and all that kind of stuff. And so we would, we were subscribed to all those magazines, and I would actually, after we're done reading them, everybody would read them cover to cover, my brother and my dad and I. And so I would tear out the photos inside that I thought were the coolest, or the covers. And in my bedroom, I had them all around. We had those accordion door type, closets, and around the edge of the closet, I would like staple those to the wall all the way around. Well, I ran out of room after a little while, and so I would take those covers and I started stapling them to the ceiling of my bedroom. So that when I laid there in my bed, I could look up at those, like before I went to sleep. And even in the slight light that was coming through with the, bathroom next door or whatever, you could still see them. And I would drift off to sleep looking at those things. And I always just thought, I would love to shoot photos like those. I never thought I would be shooting photos for those same magazines one day. And so I would just kind of like drift off to sleep and dream about that stuff. And so my dad bought a camera, a Canon AE1 camera with a normal lens and a small telephoto, like a 80 to 200 type of zoom kind of thing, which is standard in the day. But I was 12 years old, 13 years old. He was afraid I was going to break it. And that was like a big purchase for them. That was something. My parents didn't have a ton of money, and so that was like really something that was nice and a luxury for them to have. And they were afraid that something that was made of glass and plastic and stuff like that I would drop it or break it or whatever. So they never let me really touch it or use it or anything like that. So it kind of made me mad. And so I said, you know what, one day I'm going to get my own camera and I'm going to shoot my own photos. So it wasn't until I was 16 back in 1985 that I got a job working at Luby's Cafeteria cleaning tables for a summer. And so I saved up $300 and I went to a veterinarian that I knew that was Dr. Steve Benson, that was related to all the Benson family, and he was a wildlife photographer. And so we were taking some of the. My dad was managing the Lacoma Redgate Ranch, and it was a exotic game ranch, and they had all these exotic animals as well as whitetails, but it's also a big quail hunting ranch also. And so we would have to take the quail dogs, the English pointers, into the vet with my dad to get them to get their checkups and shots and stuff like that. So he had all these photos. Steve Benson had all these photos on his wall of his vet business. And so while we were in there having him check out the dogs, I told him that I was interested in buying a camera to shoot photos at the ranch. And what did he recommend? So he actually, slotted off like a half hour, like on the next Tuesday, and said, come in at this time and, we'll talk and, I'll let you know what to get. So I went in And I said, I've got $300, thinking that was a lot of money back in 1985, or I thought it was. And he said, okay, well, let's see what we can get for $300. So I ended up getting a Canon AE1 program camera and a Canon 100 to 300 5.6 aperture zoom. And I didn't get the normal lens like most everybody at the time. The normal lens was a 50 millimeter, lens that you shot people photos and stuff like that. But I wasn't interested in photographing people. I wanted to photograph wildlife like I had, seen in the magazine since I was a little kid. So I got this 100 to 300 zoom and basically ordered it in. The lens was $150. The camera was $150. And compared to cameras nowadays that are many times more expensive than that with digital and mirrorless and all that stuff, that was actually really, really cheap. So, but it was perfect for a 16-year-old kid that, was just saving money from cleaning tables. So I bought that camera, got it in. And my next question to Steve was, okay, what kind of film do I put in? I mean, it was, film back in those days, print film, slide film, what? And what do I set all these dials on? I had no clue how to even turn the camera on or run it. So he said, okay, we'll come in next Thursday at 3 p.m. and I'll show you what to do. So he told me to buy a roll of Kodachrome 64 film, which is slide film, and which I bought. And he said, this is what you do. This is your shutter speed. This is aperture. This is ISO. This is, kind of what you do to try to get a good exposure. And he told me about the Sunny 16 rule. And so I wrote all that stuff down, took notes on it, and went out to the ranch like the following day and shot that first roll of 36 exposure film and got the photos back. And I ran into a photographer at Britain's Photo, which was a local camera store down here in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, down in McAllen, Texas, where I'm from. And that photographer looked at him. I told her it was my first roll of film. She was like the studio photographer there. She looked at him and she said, man, you've really got a natural eye for composition. I was like, okay. I didn't know. I was just shooting photos of stuff at the ranch and my bird dog and stuff like that. And so she gave me like a couple of sheets to put the slides in and looked at them. And so then I bought another roll of film. And it was one of those deals where it was already after the summer, after I was done working at Luby's, starting to be fall. And so I wasn't working during the summer anymore because I had to go back to school. And so I'd had, since I was 10 years old, a lawn mowing business. And that's what I would typically do, is do the lawn mowing business, like throughout the week, have my mom drop me off kind of thing and, mow a yard with my brother and would split the money from there. And so we didn't make, a whole lot of money at the time. Like, mowing a yard was like $20, and, 10 of it was for my brother and 10 of it was for me. So it took a while to be able to afford, film and developing. So I bought another roll of film, and then I had to basically shoot a roll of film one week and then make enough money to pay for the developing the next week. So it was like every other week I'd get a roll of film and develop it. So anyway, I started shooting photos and basically shot photos till I was 19 years old. I was in college and was just shooting photos, just trying to build a file of wildlife photos. And specifically the thing that interested me the most about that first roll of film, what I photographed, is, a white-tailed doe that I photographed. And the ranch had all kinds of exotics. The first photo I actually shot was of a record book 25-inch black buck antelope, and that they had told me about on the ranch. And I actually saw him, and he was the first thing that I photographed. And I photographed bonnie bucks with new babies, zebras, ostrich. They even had rhinoceros on the ranch. It was like really, really, cool stuff that they had. But that it was that white-tailed doe and that fawn that excited me the most. And so, after that, I just kind of loved whitetails. And so just kind of concentrated on those. And, even though everybody was telling me, that's the hardest thing to photograph, they're the smartest and the most elusive and all that kind of stuff, I just wanted to photograph whitetails. I didn't care. So anyway, I started shooting photos, accumulating a file, primarily white-tailed deer. I'd photograph exotics when I saw them. I'd photograph, birds, songbirds. I'd photograph turkeys. I'd, do fishing photos because my dad was an avid bass fisherman, and I grew up bass fishing and thinking I wanted to be a professional bass fisherman one day, which, I decided to be a wildlife photographer instead of doing that. And so just kept shooting photos. And when I was 19, I started sending a few photos into some local state magazines and got my first photos published in a magazine called Texas Hunters Directory. You've heard of it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a small magazine at the time. They basically told me, we don't pay for photos, but we have helped a lot of photographers start out. And so what we will do is we will give you 6 copies of the magazine if you get anything published, and you can take those and do what they call tear sheets, which is tear, your published photos out of the magazine, and then you send those to like the next magazine, and it's like a credibility kind of thing. So anyway, so I sent them a bunch of slides that I'd been, accumulating over the years and gotten everything kind of edited down to some of my best stuff. And they ended up using one of my photos as a color shot inside, and I think 5 black and white photos inside. And so I thought that was great because one of my idols at the time that I looked up to was Jerry Smith, who's from Alice, Texas. And, he was like one of the big Field and Stream photographers at the time. And why in the world he was selling to them is probably because he was getting paid for it. And they just told me that, because I was a new guy that, never sold anything, that they didn't pay. So anyway, he only had, I think, 1 or 2 shots, and I had 6. So I was like really proud of myself that I had more than Jerry Smith, So anyway, so they sent me the magazines, and then I started sending, the tear sheets into other magazines, and, started, trying to sell stuff, couldn't really sell stuff. So when I was in college at the University of Texas Pan American, which is University of Texas Rio Grande Valley now, down in Edinburgh, Texas, I was working on getting a business marketing degree. I got to know the editor of the college magazine, which was called Rio Magazine, which Rio is, river in Spanish. So I had just written a research paper about ranching in South Texas. And I had written about like 3 or 4 of the ranches that I was photographing at the time. And he said, hey, could you take this and whittle it down to 1 ranch and talk about ranching on that ranch, how they do it. And he said, then you can write an article about it and, turn your research paper into an article, and, we'll see about your photos and maybe publish those with it. So I submitted that to him, and they published the article, and I think I had like 9 photos inside or something like that. And I was really surprised because he said, after the fact, after he gave me a copy of the magazine, he said, here's a check for $90 for a photo text package. And so I got paid $90. So that was 19 years old when I was in college. And then I started submitting more and more stuff. And then, the next place I got published statewide was Texas Trophy Hunters magazine. Back in 91, I had the cover of Texas Trophy Hunters. And then they ran an article that I wrote for them with all the photos inside about a big buck that I had photographed from 3 years old to 7.5 years old. And I wrote the article showing, in the photos, how he had gotten bigger and smaller, different years, depending on his age, depending on drought conditions in Texas and stuff like that. So that was my next step of getting published, was with the state magazines. But I actually got paid for it. And I learned you need to negotiate prices up front or find out what their photo pay rates are before you submit to them. So then the next place I got published, I sent them to a little bit bigger magazine, and that was Bowhunter magazine. And I had the cover on Bowhunter a few months later. So anyway, it just kind of started from there. And by the age of 21, I was a part-time professional, putting myself through college, working at that camera store, Britain's Photo Supply, which I took my first roll of film into. I worked there from 19 till I was 21. And then quit there and was going full-time photography. Not just wildlife. I shot weddings and portraits and all kinds of stuff, and just trying to make my cameras pay for themselves, plus put myself through college because my parents didn't have the money to send me to college. But I had to work a semester and then pay for the next semester. And so it took me 7 years to get a marketing degree that usually takes most people 4 years. So I was on the 7-year plan at UT Pan American. But anyway, and I was doing that the last several years with my camera, 100%. And the day after I graduated in December, I don't even know what year it was, 1994, I think it was. And basically, the day after I graduated in December, I had set up a flight to fly to Montana on assignment for a magazine to photograph mule deer. For an article that the editor had gone on a hunt out there, but he needed live mule deer photos on the property. So he got everything set up, everything paid for to the ranch. And so, I've been traveling ever since. And so I've, traveled for the last, 35 years or however long that's been, 30 years, all over the United States, Canada, Alaska, all over the place, photographing wildlife in general, and gotten to the place where, basically at 24 years old, when I graduated from college, I considered myself full-time photographer because I wasn't going to college or anything like that. It was just 100% photography. And I've been doing it, full-time for, 30 plus years, part-time, 35 total. And actually this summer will be 40 years since I picked up a camera back in 1985, the summer of 85. So the summer of 2025 will be 40 years. So I've been shooting photos a long time. I'm one of the old guys in the business now. I used to be the youngest guy in the business doing this professionally back in the 90s, and, been doing it ever since. And now I'm one of the OGs, as they call it. So
This episode is brought to you by American Made Maps. American Made Maps is the premier company producing printed and digital maps of all kinds. It doesn't matter what your project is, if you want the highest quality aerial imagery overlaid with customizable icons and labels, American Made Maps is the spot for you to go. So listen, check out AmericanMadeMaps.com to learn more information and sign up for a free consultation. You'll be glad you did. Well, and something that you do too, kind of like you were looking up at those particular photographers, you're like, I want to be able to do that, and you eclipsed them on that that time when you had the 6 published, but something that you kind of aspired to is to grow that, and then now you're also giving back. You're offering master courses through your website there. People can sign up to where you can kind of teach people how to get in and get close, the right ways to take photos and have these, cover quality images that you can come out to. Because a lot of these are really close encounters. You're not necessarily using these crazy long lenses. I'm sure you do it sometimes, but you're trying to teach people on the methods to be able to get in there, get close, and have these really high quality images. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your masterclass and kind of, how you're able to mentor some other people to kind of get into this space and kind of keep this type of lifestyle going. So if you wouldn't mind maybe chatting a little bit about that and what those opportunities look like.
Yeah, one of the big misconceptions, or actually 2 misconceptions that people have, is that I'm using huge telephoto lenses, like 1,000 millimeter lenses, photographing deer at 500 yards away. And most of my photos are 50 yards or less, with most of my cover shots being 20 to 30 yards. And so through my classes and through the years, I've developed techniques that allow me to be very close to wildlife, but I don't have to use big, huge lenses. Like that first lens that I had, that 100 to 300, 300 millimeter, you take that and divide it by what was at the time the normal lens, which is a 50 millimeter lens, which is kind of like what our eye sees, kind of our perspective. And so you take 300 divided by 50, that comes out to a 6x magnification. Well, you think about a 6x pair of binoculars or a 6x rifle scope, that's not really that much magnification. It does bring it in 6 times closer, but it's nothing you would try to photograph a deer at even 100 yards away. With a 300, you would really want to have that deer, 20 yards away to get, some decent photos of him. And so I don't use big, huge telephoto lenses. My lenses that I use since the early 90s was a 2-lens setup, which it was a Canon 300 millimeter 2.8 lens and a 500 millimeter 4.5 or an f4 lens. And so basically the 300 was a 6x magnification and the 500 was a 10x. When you take 500 divided by 50, it comes out to a 10x magnification. That was better for longer distance type stuff, so I didn't have to be quite as close. But you think about it, a 10x pair of binoculars is kind of a standard pair of binoculars. They're not really, and even like rifle scopes, a 3-9, when I was growing up was kind of the standard scope magnification. Now they're going up to the super high. Like my son is 18 and he's just like really into long range shooting with his bow and gun and all this kind of guns. And so he's saying, Dad, you need to, change out those old scopes for like, 16 to 24. And he's talking about all these huge magnifications. Well, those lenses aren't even in the spectrum of the new, scopes that they use nowadays. And so I had to figure out, because growing up in Texas and being, taught deer hunting here in Texas, the typical setup is you have a feeder set up and you have a blind that's 100 yards away. And usually it's an elevated blind that's above them. Which I don't understand most of the time because it's on flat ground a lot of times, so what's the reason for having an elevated blind, other than, makes you feel like you're hunting more or something. But anyway, that's the typical setup. Well, 100 yards with a 300 millimeter lens, what I started out with, it was a little brown dot in the photo. And so I figured out, okay, I've got to get closer. And so I started making my own blinds because this was back in the 80s and early 90s when there was no pop-up blinds.
Right. Right.
I had to build my own blinds out of
brush
plywood,
blind, right?
Or brush blinds, or just camoing out and stuff like that. But I also made I had a local upholstery store make a cover for a Kodak, I remember the brand, Kodak projector stand. And basically it's 4 legs. And then it had like a table on top of it. And that's where you put your projector. And it had like legs that, went in and out. And so I had this local upholstery shop make a cover with like a sock going out where I could put my lens out of it. And I made my own pop-up blind. So I started placing those blinds, those wood blinds that I would make, or brush blinds, or that little pop-up blind, like 30 yards away instead of 100 yards away, to fill up the frame a little closer. And so I was doing that, over 35 years ago. And so I've developed over the years, having traveled all over the United States, photographing whitetails in just about every region of the United States and Canada, and every habitat you can imagine, trying to take what I learned here in Texas and apply that to what I learned, around the United States, having to tweak things and change things based on the situation, and every property's different. And so basically I've learned and kind of perfected the techniques of how to get very, very close to whitetail deer, and especially heavily hunted whitetail deer. And those are the ones that taught me the most was, deer that are heavily, heavily hunted. And so, they're like heavily managed, because to have a property that's heavily, that grows big deer, you've got to shoot a lot of deer, cull bucks, does especially. And so does are your worst ones to try to fool, because those are, they're trying to raise fawns. They're thinking that something's wanting to eat them ever since the day they were born. And they're also the ones that are harvested the most. And so these deer, get very, very spooky on a heavily managed place, even though they let the bucks grow to maturity and all that stuff. And, let the deer, show their full antler potential and full body potential, getting, to full size at 5, 6, 7 years old. But those bucks get very, very smart over those years, especially when they see so many of their buddies get shot right next to them, so they wise up, with all that negative human interaction. So I deal with a lot of places like that because the magazines want photos of big whitetails. They like big rack deer. And so, not unusually big, but they just want something that somebody can kind of dream about. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like Playboy magazine. You don't want to see, the standard girl. You want to see somebody that's like a little cut above the rest. And so they want to show photos of deer on the covers of magazines that are a little bit cut above the rest, a little bit bigger, but not something that's, ungodly big, like a lot of the breeder bucks nowadays and stuff like that. So I've developed these techniques, and I started 3 years ago doing these master classes. And, I'd been doing them before, like on a one-on-one basis, and I still do that to this day. But I've got things set up where we have specific dates at a, high-end type ranch, Las Raíces Ranch here in South Texas, that has, a native whitetail herd that, is on 4,200 acres that just, grows some really, really big deer. They're very, the owner of the property is very management minded, and he understands whitetails about as well as anybody I've met in the business. So anyway, so I teach people that you don't have to have these monstrous lenses. I teach them how to get close to the wildlife or get the wildlife close to them so that they can fill the frames of their photos and fill the frames of, photos like you see up here that, it's not a little tiny brown dot. It's a impactful image of a white-tailed deer, and you can see every detail down to the eyelashes and everything else. But it's because you got that deer close to you. You're using lenses that are a lot less expensive. You're using lenses that, don't have a lot of magnification so that they are very, very sharp, because they're not these big monstrous lenses that have all these, design flaws in them and stuff like that. And plus it saves you a lot of money. So anyway, so the class really pays for itself in the equipment that you don't have to buy. That's so super astronomically expensive. I mean, you can buy those super, expensive lenses, but what people don't realize, they see my lenses. I got the big white lenses like you see on the sidelines at football games, NFL games, and college games, but they're not that much magnification. They're actually big around because they're gathering light. It's not so much the magnification. Like right now, I changed from that earlier system that I told you, the 300-2.8 and the 500 f4 system, two lens system, to where I'm using now, because I'm starting to shoot more video for social media, because that's, kind of the way things are going. And so I've moved down 100 millimeters for each of those two main lenses that I use as a two lens setup. So instead of a 302.8, I'm now using a 200 millimeter f2. So it's got more light gathering capability, but it's a little bit wider. Instead of the 500 f4, I'm shooting a 400 millimeter 2.8 lens. So a 400 is an 8x magnification. I went from 10x down to 8x. I went from a 300, which was 6x, down to a 200 millimeter, which is 4x magnification. People use 4x scopes for like hunting Cape buffalo, like in close range type stuff. I mean, that it's like a close range, 50 yards or less kind of situation with the same magnification in rifle scopes. Nobody would use a 4x pair of binoculars. That's hardly any magnification whatsoever. So anyway, so I teach them how to get close, how to get the wildlife close to them, how to basically be undetected, how to overcome the eyes, ears, and nose of the white-tailed deer. I teach them how to defeat what I call the danger detection system. White-tailed deer has their head up, and that danger detection system is constantly scanning with their ears, their eyes, and their nose. All that, is detected with that head that's on a periscope. So I teach them how to overcome those three things, which, as you know, with a white-tailed deer, they've got some of the best eyes, the ears, and nose in the animal kingdom. And so anyway, so that's what I teach them. I teach them about how to, set things up to be able to get cover quality type photos. So it's a 3-day class over 4 days. It's a half day where they show up midday and they're in the field that first afternoon. And then they have 2 full days after that. And then they have a last half day of morning before they leave, after breakfast on the 4th day. So it's 3 full days. I limit the class to 6 people so that each person can have one morning or afternoon sit in the blind with me. And I'm just there with them one-on-one, answering any questions, as we're whispering, we're not doing that while the bucks are there or whatever. But basically I, tell them, okay, you need to change this, you need to do that. And I work with them on their setup and how they're, set up to shoot photos. And I'm just there to advise them or just shoot the bull if they want. And so anyway, so that's one of the cool things that we do. And then we teach the class basically middle of the day and, do that between sits. And we even do it after in the evening because I have so much information to share with them. And everybody that has taken it have just been rabid supporters of the classes. And just, one guy wrote an article about it. Is it worth taking Lance Krueger's, Whitetail Dream Bucks up close masterclass? And it's been a real huge success. So anyway, so I'm going to be offering those again this fall, probably in November sometime. And if anybody's interested, they can contact me. I don't have like the dates set up yet, so there's no masterclass, button. I've already taken that off because we've already done the ones for 2024. But if anybody wants to do something like in Velvet, wants to come down to some of my ranches or something, or do something specific, I can book them on a daily basis, day rate type basis, and teach them one-on-one, so they don't have to have 5 other people that are trying to ask questions and stuff like that. So anyway, so I offer that on an individual basis, but also as a group setting as well, where all the food and lodging and all that kind of stuff is provided. So it's a great time, and deer camp feel, and everybody sitting around in the evening around the dinner table looking at photos, what everybody got during the day. And it's just an electric charged situation, because everybody's supporting each other and high-fiving over success with animals that we didn't think we would see. And there's other times that we don't see the deer that we're after at a specific spot the whole time we're there, the whole week, but other times people get photos of the same deer. So it's a lot of fun, and a great learning experience. And Las Raices is just an incredible place, and good food and good fellowship, and it's just a fun time.
Man, that sounds like checking all the boxes. And I love that, people who want to kind of get into this is a really great fast track way to get in there and learn how to do this with one of the best. I mean, you have been, I think, probably one of the most, I know you're the most, covered photoed photographer as far as on Field and Stream. I know that you've been in so many different books and magazines. I mean, one of the most published white-tailed deer and wild turkey photographers in the world. And I know that there's so many things that you've put out there. I love that you also have a calendar each year that you put out. And again, I'll have all the show notes below, or in the show notes, all the links, but to your website there to go ahead and pick that up. And it looks amazing. I want to kind of bring it back around to, what I teased in the very beginning. And you were talking about sometimes you're out there for multiple days in a row. You got a target buck in your mind that you want to take a picture of. And, you recently had a trip that you went down. If you want to talk about the buck that you recently had an encounter with, which, was the reason why we had to kind of pause this for a couple days. But if you wouldn't go ahead and talk about what made that buck in particular so special.
Well, I had seen some video back in mid-December of a white-tail buck that I had only seen one of this type of buck before. And what it is it was he's a palmated buck, and basically looks like he's part fallow deer or part moose. He's just got these big paddles, big palms on his antlers instead of main beams that are kind of rounded and that kind of thing. So I contacted, I remembered the deer from December, but I was photographing on so many properties all over the state. Basically the whole month of December and January, I was gone photographing in a blind. The only time I was basically back home was for Christmas and New Year's and stuff like that. And so, and plus my son was bow hunting at several of these properties, throughout the year, trying to get his first buck with a bow. And so that actually has been like a 3-year, time frame of him trying to get one, and shooting at a couple, and they, his bow was too loud, and they ducked the string or whatever you call it. Sure. And anyway, jumped the string. That's the word. And so went right over their back and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so he was with me, but I had found out about this buck back in mid-December, and I wanted to contact the landowner because I had met him previously, but I'd never photographed there. And so I remembered that buck, and I was just thinking, man, I would love to have that deer in my book. And I'm working on a book project that I'm going to be photographing for the next couple of years that I hope to have, produced and published here in the next few years. But basically, I thought I would love to have that deer in my book because he's such a rarity. The last time I had seen a palmated deer was back in like 1995. When I was like 25, 26 years old. I was guiding hunters in Michigan, and one of the hunters on the ranch, my hunter shot a palmated deer on the ranch, but I never got to photograph it because I didn't even know the deer even existed. He showed up, and I was like, shoot that buck. I mean, he's a really unusual buck, and he shot it. And the only photos I got of him was when the deer was dead. Never got any photos of him alive because I didn't even know he even existed. Right. And so here it is, 30 years later, and I had never seen a palmated deer, even though I've been to some of the top properties in North America, seen thousands and thousands of mature whitetails. I had not seen another palmated deer. Well, when I saw the video of this deer, I contacted the landowner like late January, because I was just gone and had everything scheduled with all kinds of landowners all over Texas and going to the hill country and central Texas and all over South Texas. And so I said, hey, is there any way I could try to photograph this deer? I'd really like to get him in this upcoming book that I'm working on. And we set things up for me to arrive like the 31st of January on Friday night, which was just this last week. And so I arrived Friday night. He said, here's the problem. We've got 10,000 acres. We have no feeders on the ranch. We have no blinds on the ranch, and we have no game cameras. We saw this deer back in December. We saw him a few times, and there was like a 1 mile area that they had seen him. And they said, but we have no idea where he is. We don't really concentrate on that part of the ranch because it's not considered like one of the better parts of the ranch. They've got like at the far south end of the ranch, it's more bottomland habitat. And he said, that's where our bigger deer are. We go down to that end of the ranch most of the time. And so I said, well, that's the deer I want to photograph. I don't want to just photograph just any other deer. Right. I want to try to photograph him. And that's one of the things that I've done over the years that I do a lot of is I will like trophy hunt, which to me, trophy hunting is when you go after a specific deer or a specific class or size of deer. And I will fine tune that down to where I'm going after a buck. And so that has taught me a lot of how to figure out whitetails over the last 30 something years. And so we set up based on local knowledge. The best local knowledge you can get is the landowner or the person that actually saw the deer. And so they told me where they saw him. And because I didn't get to meet him till 9 o'clock at night, it gets dark at 6:15, 6:30. We were basically there with flashlights trying to figure out where can I set up a blind. And, South Texas, they feed, and they don't have feeders on this ranch, but they do use road feeders, on trucks and spread it out on roads and stuff like that, and senderos and that kind of thing. And so they didn't really feed this area. I didn't even know if it even come to corn or not, and if it even ever really tasted corn. And so we set up this blind in the night with the flashlights, and he said, this is one of the places we've seen him, but we've also seen him like a mile south in on down the road, basically. And so I set up a blind with the best knowledge I had that I could see in the dark, this little opening. And so I set a blind up. We went back to the ranch house, had supper, went to bed, and got up the next morning. And I sat in that blind. And so I was supposed to be there because he has a regular job. This is the grandson of the owner. And he said, I can be there Friday and Saturday. I'll meet you. I can be there Saturday and Sunday. I'll meet you there Friday night. That's why he got there at 9 o'clock at night. So I was going to be there Saturday and Sunday. And so Saturday morning, I had a spike and like 5 does and fawns come in. So I knew this was going to be tough. I from the outset, I knew that I would probably walk away with no photos of this deer at all. Cause that happens to me a majority of the time where I don't see the deer that I'm after. And so, or photograph him. And so middle of the day, I set up another setup that was more of an afternoon spot that was probably 400 yards away from this, north of this. And I set that up for an afternoon light. And the other one I had set up for morning light. And so I set that one up and came back and sat in that one that afternoon, which usually I like to let the, blind sit for at least three to 5 days before I sit in them. But this part of the ranch, they only lightly hunt this ranch. They only take they only do like 4 hunts. But within those hunts, they'll shoot, they'll have groups of like 5 or 6 hunters. Yeah, so they only shoot like 20 something deer, but they really concentrate on that best area, which is way south of where I was. It was like several miles from where I was on this 10,000 acres. And so anyway, I sat there in the afternoon in my afternoon blind. And so the deer they're kind of fine with a new blind being there. even though the deer were actually kind of spooked by it a little bit. They were like really kind of watching, but they would kind of come in. So anyway, I sat there in the afternoon, nothing came in. And that evening, one of the grandsons, he has this business that he's doing, thermal drone surveys, deer surveys. I think it's called Rio Vision Solutions or something like that. And the name of the ranch actually that I was on is called the Triple Drop Ranch, which a lot of people have, followed them on Instagram and stuff like that. And so Sam, the grandson, said, "Hey, tonight, why don't we go and try to see if we can locate this deer and see where he is? So maybe we can move the blinds to wherever he is located." So we go up. I'd never seen like nighttime drone work with thermal. The ones that I'd always seen in the past was just like the daylight type, right, that you fly during the day, DJIs and stuff like that. Well, he has a special high dollar thermal one that actually has a spotlight built into it that will follow the camera and have a spotlight at night. So you can have the thermal vision of it, of the animal, and then you get closer to it and zoom in, and then you can have the spotlight version. So it's like full color. So he went up, he said, this isn't ideal conditions, because he said with the thermal, it works better if you do it like at like 5:00 in the morning, because all the vegetation and everything has cooled off. And one of the things I found out, he would sit there in his vehicle in the front seat running, with his little remote control deal. And the other landowner, grandson, and I were sitting in the back seat with a 20-inch, 30-inch screen that he hooked up to it, and we would watch as he would move around. And so the first thing we saw, he was like, "Hey, I think that's a deer right there." And so he moved in closer to it. Well, it was glowing white. And I said, "Yeah, I think that looks like a buck." Well, it was actually a cactus, because cactus absorb a lot of heat during the day. And it was like in the 80s when I was there last weekend.
Yeah.
And so that absorbs heat. And I found out that also mesquite branches, and mesquite, because it's black, absorbs a lot of heat also. And so he said it's better when you go like 5:00 in the morning, because those things have cooled off and they're not glowing white like the deer. Deer, turkeys, coyotes, everything basically glow white with his setup. So anyway, he flew for probably, I don't know, an hour looking to see if we could locate that deer. We located a bunch of deer. We saw coyotes. We saw a bobcat that was right behind my blind, tons of armadillos, jackrabbits, hogs. We saw pretty much everything, multiple whitetail deer, but we did not see the buck we were after. And so they basically told me, we don't know what to tell you. He may be here. He said, we saw him during the rut. He might have just been through here, and maybe he lives somewhere else, a mile or two away. We have no clue if this is his home area or not. And here we are after the rut, post rut. Chances are very high that you're not going to see anything. So anyway, the next morning I went back and I sat in my morning spot. Didn't see him again. This was Sunday morning. So Saturday, blanked out, morning and afternoon. Sunday morning, blanked out. So I went back, talked it over with the guys, and I said, what do y'all think? Where should I move the blind? What should I do? And they said, I think you should move it like south to the other spot that we've seen him before. So it was like 10:40 in the morning. We'd just eaten breakfast. I was driving to one of my two blinds, and I was going to take my morning blind and move that like a mile south. And as I came around the corner, I saw deer in the road right in front of my afternoon blind. And I put binoculars up through the windshield, and he was 10 yards from my blind eating corn and on the road in front of my blind, 10 yards from it. And he had several other deer with him. And so I actually shot cell phone video. I could show you the little 18 seconds of video, and it's cell phone, but you can see the big blobs of antler. I mean, the big flat palms of antler as he was feeding. You could tell it was him. So I backed out. I went around and got my morning blind out of there, and went back to the ranch house and said, "Hey, what do y'all think?" And they were like, "Well, this is the area. He's right in front of your blind. And so that's, no reason to move it to the other place." So I went back there that afternoon, high hopes, sat there all afternoon. Actually, you know what? Sunday morning, I didn't see a deer in that morning blind. No spike, no does, no nothing that I had seen actually fairly consistently before that. Go back to the afternoon blind on Sunday afternoon, high hopes he'll come back. No sign of him. And I think there was just like some small 1 and 2 year old bucks was all I saw, and does and fawns. So I was kind of bummed because I was thinking this is going to be the afternoon, but I thought, okay, next day, this is Monday morning. I thought I'm going to sit there because I saw him at 10:40. I thought I'm going to sit there till 11 or 12. And so got in there, sat there till 12. He didn't show up at all. None of the deer. I had some small bucks and does show up, but that was it. So I went back and ate lunch Monday afternoon. I sat there from 3:30 till 7 till it was pitch black. He never showed up again. So all day Monday, no dice. The last day I could be there was Tuesday. And the ranch owners, they had already left, and they said, you can just stay here. You know, here's the combo to the front gate. Here's, you know, you can use the ranch truck with a feeder on it and all that kind of stuff. And so I was just there by myself on the ranch. And so Tuesday came around and I was like, well, this is my last chance. Well, the night before I had texted you because I had remembered, I think I've got a podcast with George sometime in February, but I didn't realize when it was. And I looked and I was like, that podcast is supposed to be tomorrow on the 4th of February. And so I texted you like at 10:07 at night and said, hey, sorry, I didn't realize when this was. I'm on a ranch, extending my stay. I'm after a palmated buck, and maybe we can reschedule it for later. Well, I didn't hear back from you, I guess, till the next morning. You were probably already in bed or whatever, had your phone off. And the next morning at like 7:45, I get a response from you. And basically we were texting back and forth, and I said, I'm here in the blind. I haven't seen anything. And I explained the situation to you. And you're like, that was a really cool reason to, have to reschedule a podcast, is because you're after this buck. So anyway, I was like, today's the last day. I still may not see him. So I'm sitting there. Then at about 9 or 9:30 in the morning, about 2 hours after we had texted, the buck came in, and I got a couple thousand photos of him, video of him. He was like 20 yards away. I got all kinds of photos of him, awesome photos. And so anyway, I texted you a photo off the back of my camera, really poor quality, cell phone pic of the deer, and said, success. I finally got him. So anyway, so it's kind of cool that we were talking back and forth, and I, was able to get him while we were kind of talking in the blind. So anyway, so that was kind of neat. And then that afternoon, I went back to the blind and got him in the afternoon also on Tuesday. So once he finally figured out, there's corn there, I think he thought maybe they're, because when they're driving with those road feeders on the front of the truck or whatever, there'll be spillage off as they hit bumps and stuff like that. Some of the corn will come out of those feeders. And so when I saw him at 10:44 on Sunday morning, I think he thought it was just like spillage, because they never really feed in that area. They, feed in the better part of the ranch, on the south part. And so I think he had just found the corn that was on the road and, just walked away. And so then when he found out that I had put spots of corn out in specific places where I wanted particular backgrounds and stuff, he finally found that, and he was there. He didn't come in at all on Tuesday. Not at all on Monday. And then on Tuesday, I think he found the corn maybe in the night or something, the leftover corn from the day before. And he was in there both morning and afternoon. So anyway, so it was really cool. I got some great photos of him, and I haven't even looked at him on my computer, but I got a bunch of good stuff of him. So I'm pretty excited and pretty thrilled about what I got. So I at least got photos of him for for the book. I don't know if I'll ever get him on the cover of a magazine, because he's got these palms that are like, double width of hands, got little short tines on them. But he's got 7 on his right and 6 on his left. And, his longest tine is probably 5 inches, 4 inches. I don't know what it is. It's just like it's crazy looking. He looks like a moose, or he looks like a
Yeah,
fallow deer. I mean, it's just
100%.
bizarre.
No, it's amazing. It's one of the most beautiful deer, man. I've seen it. I cannot wait for people to be able to see that. So, whether that's the book or whether it's a cover of a magazine or whatever you decide to do with it, I can't wait to have that be shared and get people's feedback. Just I know we're gonna have to have you back another time to chat because I want to cover all sorts of other types of deer colorations and things. Obviously, you know that I'm a big melanistic fan. Having taken a couple and had a few off our property, and I'm still looking for that big buck to have you come out and photograph out there too. So we'll be
Please, please
in
do.
touch. Oh, the second I see one, it's like I got you on speed dial for that, man. I got you in the favorite list, ready to go. It's just been a bunch of doe and coming some smaller bucks that we've seen, but it's been amazing. I mean, that one buck I had is one of those things too. It's one of the largest that's ever been taken in North America, and it just happened to be one that we had kind of just seen running around, and then it just kind of everything aligned, perfectly for whenever I got into the stand that one day. But and I'll leave a link to that too because that's a fun little story. But I know that you've taken pictures of so many different types of deer. Obviously, we got turkey season coming up too, so we'll just be staying in touch, and I'll get you back on again. But for those who want to learn more about your masterclass, to order a calendar, see some of the image, to maybe check out some of the different photos that you've had there too, like some behind you there, and just kind of take a look at some awesome deer pics. I want folks to go visit your website. Why don't you tell us, where they can go and maybe some of the social media handles that you have so that people can kind of follow along your journey, if you don't mind.
All right. Yeah. My website is my name, basically Lance dash, the little hyphen thing, Krueger.com. So that's LANCE dash KRUEGER.com. And then I'm on Instagram, and that's at LanceKrueger.com, or it's just at Lance Krueger. Lance_Krueger. Then on Facebook, you can also find me at Lance Krueger Photography on Facebook. That's my business page. And then just plain Lance Krueger for my personal page, but that's more family photos and stuff like that. Then I'm on LinkedIn also, and that's just under Lance Krueger. You can find me there. So those are the main ways. I post photos every day, and at least one photo, and sometimes up to 3 photos. I'm about to start moving into turkey photos here pretty soon, but throughout the year, 365 days of the year, I post a deer photo because that's by far my most popular and most requested photos is of whitetails. So during the spring and summer, I'll do a whitetail, I'll do a turkey, and I'll do a fishing photo. And so anyway, so you'll see 3 per day throughout the rest of the spring and summer. And then in fall, I'll do, 3, maybe 4 photos per day. And it's mostly all whitetails during the fall and winter.
And I'll tell everyone who's listening or watching, these photos are amazing. They are, top tier without a doubt. I love following and just be able to check out what you got each day. But I can't wait for your book to come out. Everyone, make sure you go and order those calendars. It's well worth it. I just love them, man. You are such an amazing photographer. I love that you're also sharing your knowledge that you've had through all these years and this experience with other people, and kind of helping pass that baton along to the next generation who's going to be, enjoying this and being able to share our abundant, amazing wildlife that we have in this country. Lance, thank you so much for joining me. I'll definitely have you back on and look forward to that and hanging out with you sometime soon.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it, George.
Cheers.
Take care.